Bay Area.
Thank you very much. We'll continue here on Sunday Today.
As we are looking at live pictures coming from the San Francisco Bay Area tonight, courtesy of KRON, from an area just across the bay in the approach to the San Francisco Bay Bridge on the Oakland side. It's called the Cypress Bridge approach. It is Interstate 880, and that was at the peak of the rush hour when all of this occurred, we think. Well, it would be hard to survive a lot of that, I'll tell you. We're going to take you back now to KRON-TV, to Emerald Yee and to Evan White, who have been covering this story throughout the evening. And I'll be giving away here to NBC's Chuck Scarborough. We'll have continuing coverage as long as the story warrants it throughout the evening on NBC, and then a special edition continuing tomorrow morning on NBC's Today Show. We'll begin first with NBC News at sunrise, and then an extended edition of the Today program, going live across the country, bringing you up to date on the extent of the damage and the repair. So here now, Evan White and Emerald Yee.
Here's some Marin information about transportation commute for the morning. Golden Gate Transit says they are going to run ferries from Larkspur from 5:30 in the morning. There are going to be 3 boats, and they're simply going to run them continuously all through the day. Sausalito's going to run its ferry from 7:15 in the morning. Perhaps earlier, they're not sure. Buses will run over the Golden Gate Bridge on a normal schedule. If traffic gets too heavy, they're saying that they're going to divert the buses and the traffic on those buses to the Larkspur Ferry. The red and white fleet will run service. They're running it now from the ferry building to Jack London Square. They have not told us how long they're going to be doing that.
Right now, we'd like to show you some damage from Los Gatos. We don't have things askew, glass cracked. But basically in the peninsula area towards San Jose, there have been no reports of major injuries. But again, this is Los Gatos. And this is after darkness fell, people walking around, trying to get their bearings once again. Here are some pieces of structures that fell to the floor at 5:04 when the earthquake hit.
All right, Greg, can you shed any light?
Evan, we're starting, our phone system just came up downstairs. We're starting to get some calls now from school districts about tomorrow. The Jefferson School District in Daly City will be closed tomorrow for its 7,000 students. There are 15 schools there, 12 elementary and 3 junior high. Again, they will be closed. Though Superintendent Joe DiGeronimo is asking that custodial and maintenance people do report to work because they want to clean up the schools and get them ready for the day after. That's Jefferson School District in Daly City, closed tomorrow. Police tell us, we have not yet confirmed with Oakland schools, that Oakland schools will be closed tomorrow. And we've also gotten a call from Tahia Day School in El Cerrito, which has 160 children, grades 4 to 8. They will be closed tomorrow. That's it for the moment. We'll keep you up to date as it comes in.
All right, unfortunately, I've been handed to the worst part of all this, and that is an update on fatalities. The estimate from the Cypress section of the Oakland freeway is 250. That is still an estimate, by the way, not a confirmed number. From the San Francisco Marina fire, the number of dead is 8. From the 6th and Townsend collapse in the San Francisco South Market is 5. And in Santa Cruz, the collapse at the mall, now they say 6 people died there, which is more than we knew about before.
So at least in the Marina area, the last we had heard was 3 dead, and now there's 8. So the death toll is climbing.
Unfortunately, death tolls, well, the worst part, the injured toll, is not even possible to calculate at this hour, because there are still people trapped. They're still hunting for more.
All right, earlier we showed you tape from Los Altos, or actually that was Los Gatos, but now from Los Altos Police Department, they're saying the extent of damage there, and this is in the peninsula area, is relatively light. There are many calls for assistance relating to apparent gas and water leaks and downed power lines. So that seems to be the extent of the problems down there. There are, however, also calls for medical assistance because there have been several car accidents. There have been 2 structures that have been reported to have partially collapsed, and there's some window breakage, but you can report that.
Indeed, no deaths. Nice to say. Santa Clara seems so far to have fared relatively well, in that, unfortunately, sometimes a lack of information can be misleading. But we haven't had serious reports of widespread injuries or damage.
The last we heard was from our reporter, Carl Sunken, and he was in the San Jose Bureau getting ready to go on live on our newscast when the earthquake hit. And from there, he went out and he was heading towards Santa Cruz, and he was able to get a quick survey of the San Jose area. And he said that it seemed that San Jose came through okay. Kaiser's in San Francisco, by the way, would like to ask that everyone with regular appointments to not come in. They have no power in the medical building. They're on auxiliary power in the hospital. They are accepting emergencies. Urgent care patients should be going to the emergency room, and this is on Geary Street.
We don't know the situation of telephones, which is very difficult because when the sun comes up tomorrow and people want to continue daily lives, it's very difficult to know if you'd keep doctor's appointments and what damage in buildings, what hospitals don't need you to come in today. Not much we can say is use your best judgment and then hope maybe phone service can get restored. But tens of thousands of phones are still out and are going to stay out for a while.
And you can assume that the first order of the day is just to get everything back to normal. So a lot of routine things, of course, will not be occurring tomorrow.
The 7-point earthquake on the 17th of October. 5:04. Widespread damage in the Bay Area. If you've been with us, you know it is serious. The Cypress overpass, the most serious location where rescue efforts continue. The devastating fire in the Marina District of San Francisco, hampered by the failure of the water system to deliver because the earthquake broke the water mains underground. It also broke the gas mains in much of the Bay Area, certainly in Oakland and San Francisco, and that causes concerns. That continues to be a problem with getting 2 gas leaks, finding them, getting them shut down. We have more. Highland Hospital, the trauma center there, where many of the Cypress injuries were taken. Say 7 are in the trauma unit, 2 are critical, several with serious injuries. They have several doctors and nurses who have come in, and these are doctors who have come from other hospitals coming to Highland because they seem to be bearing much of the brunt of the disaster at the Cypress overpass.
They're reporting that some power is back up now in Pittsburgh, and the San Jose Unified School District will be closed tomorrow. We're giving you very spotty, disparate announcements, but that's the way it is in a situation.
Hopefully we get some more information because Bob and Suzanne are standing by back at our location at Sutro Tower to carry on from here. We switch back to Bob and Suzanne.
Thank you, Evan. Emerald.
We are coming to you from Sutro Tower. We'd like to give some credit to the people at Sutro who've made it possible for us to get our signal to you. This is an earthquake-safe building, and in any kind of a situation like this place can still transmit, and we feel very fortunate to be able to bring you what we have. Now, we have talked a lot about tonight the Cypress overpass of the 880 freeway in Oakland. This is, if you don't know the area, let me explain quickly. If you're coming from San Francisco, crossing the Bay Bridge, you can go north on 80 to Berkeley, or you can go south on Highway 880, it was formerly 17, into Oakland. It's that section there, a mile to a mile and a half, which has collapsed. We'd like to show you what is now edited tape. We have that capacity here at Sutro to edit tape. You haven't seen this footage before. It's going to start just as the earthquake hits.
This was the first major jolt that the Bay Area got at about 5:04 this afternoon.
So the camera's shooting in Oakland, and very shortly, again, the unreinforced masonry is taking the brunt of the damage. Water mains all over both Oakland and San Francisco have ruptured. And as Evan and Emerald have been telling you, here is the 880 overpass. Okay, you're looking at the lower structure of this double-decker roadway that has completely given way. If you look at it from the top, you can see that it's buckled to and fro. Again, we have an estimated 250 dead here. Originally, there were 400 injured. A lot of people like this gentleman did what they could to try to help others. You'll see this man try to climb over. He was apparently in a car on the upper deck. He tries to climb over to see what's going on beneath because he knows that his deck fell, and certainly the deck below is taking the brunt of it. Now you see how the two decks have come together here. The cars are completely smashed in there.
And what this man is doing, like many did, is to look underneath this structure to see if any people were trapped. And we have unofficial reports that some people were pulled from beneath this tonnage of concrete and steel.
Here is a case in point. Again, upper deck of the bridge, and they were able to get a stretcher up here. They're going to have to take this man down on a fire ladder to get him down to the ground. We're about 50 feet above ground at this point.
They were extending these ladders all the way up as far as they would go to get some of these people down.
You see the top of the ladder there. He was one of the lucky ones, of course, being on the upper deck. Below, we can tell you right now we have firm word that many rescue operations are still going on at this scene in Oakland.
The problem was this, that at the time of the earthquake, which we have repeated many times tonight, 504, there were certain sections of this freeway that had a backup, that had cars literally bumper to bumper at the time. Other sections, they were moving. Now, it was that section of the freeway, that mile-and-a-half stretch that Suzanne had mentioned earlier, where this tonnage of concrete and steel literally came down, sandwiching many of these victims between.
All right, we've been watching KRON in San Francisco as they bit by bit, piece by piece, put that story together. I'm Chuck Scarborough, NBC News in New York. Tom Brokaw has departed now. He is on his way to San Francisco to cover the story firsthand. I'm going to be spelling him until we hand it off at 4 o'clock in the morning to John Palmer. We're going to be covering straight through into tomorrow with this story, this major story, an incredible tragedy unfolding in San Francisco right now in the Bay Area. As you saw, the focal point of most of the damage right now, as far as we can assess, is that area on the Oakland Bay Bridge on the eastern side, the approach, where the concrete has pancaked down, the upper level pancaking down on the lower level, crushing many cars down there. The death toll is estimated now by some accounts to be up as high as 250 people, a major tragedy in that one spot alone. In San Francisco right now is Senator Pete Wilson, Republican of California. He is in the city. Are you with us, Senator?
Yes, I am, Chuck.
All right. Obviously, the immediate concern right now is the rescue of those who can be saved. What do you know about the situation from your perspective?
Well, not a great deal. I've been on the phone tonight to the White House and to the governor's office in Sacramento, but you have to understand that here in the city, there is no power. And therefore, you've seen pictures that I've not seen because there's no television. There's very little in the way of phone service. This happens to be one of the few that is able to function, and it's able to call out but not take any incoming calls. But what we are getting is information from radio. And though the State Office of Emergency Services has been reluctant, in fact has refused to give any official casualty counts, what we're hearing from local news accounts on the radio is that the devastation along the Cypress freeway in Oakland has resulted in terrific loss of life of about 200 people.
And there is, of course, devastation throughout the area. I understand damage was felt as far away as 250 miles from the epicenter of the earthquake.
I've heard reports that it was felt as far away as Los Angeles. This was a big one. I'm told it was 7 on the Richter scale, and when it hit, I was on the 13th floor of the Clift Hotel in San Francisco, and it was the biggest I have ever experienced.
Was the hotel swaying, Senator?
It was shaking.
Side to side? Now, can you give us some picture of the steps that government agencies are going to have to go through now? As we said at the outset of the interview here, the first objective is to rescue those who can be saved, but then I think you have to take a larger picture, don't you, and take a good hard look at the infrastructure, because that can cause long-term problems if there is serious damage to water, gas, tunnels, other roadways.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There has been damage, we know already, to water mains on both sides of the bay. There has been an evacuation of an area that runs along the northern part of San Francisco, adjacent to the bay, called the Marina, where there was a fire earlier tonight. It began with a 3-story apartment building being consumed, and 7 people were killed in that tragedy. And there is evidently the fear that there are some gas mains that have been mooring area is virtually evacuated. To my amazement, if these reports are accurate, the Corps of Engineers evidently thinks that they can reopen that Oakland Bay Bridge by Thursday, which strikes me as nothing less than miraculous.
Well, I would agree with you. I've seen the photographs and the video coverage of that bridge, too. With that section down, the top section, not only damaged itself, but it seemed to have knocked a portion of the bottom section loose in that bridge. It's difficult to imagine how in a couple of days that can be re-erected.
Yeah, and as you point out, you can't tell. We certainly can't tell tonight. It's pitch black. We can't tell until daylight comes, and the utility workers have actually gone out and inspected. So at this point, any assessment of damage is very preliminary.
All right, Senator Wilson, thank you very much. That's Senator Pete Wilson, Republican of California, who was in San Francisco at the time of the quake, giving us his point of view. Obviously, a personal tragedy for him, or a personal experience that he won't forget, and an experience for many of his constituents out there that they are trying to struggle through at this moment. To help us understand what happens when a quake like this strikes and the severity of a quake that's either 6.9 or 7 on the Richter scale, we have Dr. David Simpson, who is a seismologist, with us. Dr. Simpson, forgive me, I don't know where you are, but can you tell us right now where you are, and we'll begin our discussion. We're located in Palisades, New York, at Lamont Doherty Geological Observatory, which is part of Columbia University. How serious is a 6.9 or a 7 earthquake? Certainly not the largest earthquakes that occur, but certainly what we would call a significant earthquake. For comparison, this earthquake is about the same size as the Armenian earthquake that occurred last December. All right, I'm sorry, I'm getting some other information here, Doctor. Give us an example, if you would, the comparison of a 7 quake or a 6.9 quake to the 6.6 quake that struck in 1971 in the San Fernando area. How much more powerful is a 6.9 than a 6.6 on the Richter scale? That would be something like 5 to 8 times stronger, covering a fault zone that's maybe twice as long as what occurred in that earthquake. And comparing that then, going back to 1906, to the great quake that hit San Francisco that measured 8.3, how much more powerful was that quake than the one they experienced today? The 1906 earthquake would have been 10 to 20 times at least larger than the one that occurred now. Now, you've been discussing this quake with other seismologists, have you not? Yes, we've been talking to some of the people. Very few we've been able to get through to in California, but we've talked to some at other government agencies throughout the states. What triggers a quake like this? Pardon me? What triggers a quake like this? Well, this earthquake is part of the ongoing geological process that results from the interaction between the Pacific plate and the North American plate, which are gradually slipping by one another all along the coast of California. And these two plates gradually build up pressure, and eventually they release the pressure, and that's what you have. You have this sudden shock of the release of pressure along the fault line. That's right. And the shock causes, I understand, a lateral movement in the earth, and that's what causes all the damage. It's the sort of lateral wave. There are various different types of waves released, but generally it's a rapid slipping of one side of the fault relative to the other. Mm-hmm. So any structure that isn't designed to withstand lateral movement is in deep trouble. Well, from an earthquake like this, you get various types of motion, and the shaking of the base of a building usually is in a lateral sense more than in the vertical sense. What we're looking at here are some views of the San Andreas Fault, which look to the eye of any seismologist a bit menacing, I would imagine. I don't think you can see them where you are right now, can you, Doctor? No, I don't. You don't have a television set? We have some aerial views here that we're looking at the fault that runs along San Francisco, past San Francisco down to the Los Angeles area. And it was this fault that was the origin of the quake that hit today and did so much damage in San Francisco. To help us understand exactly how the damage occurs at the structure buildings, we have Dr. Thomas O'Rourke with us from Cornell University. Dr. O'Rourke?
Yes, Chuck.
You're there? Okay. Explain, will you, if you take it a little bit farther from what we're just talking about, when a quake hits and you have this kind of sudden shift in the earth, the shaking, how that triggers the cascading events that cause buildings to fall, bridges to fall, and that sort of thing.
Well, Chuck, the ground shaking will generate forces and displacements in the structures, which can cause failures in the individual members.
I'm not on now.
And then collapse of buildings, or, as we've seen tragically, of some of the elevated highways. We also have another effect of the earthquake. We have the effect on the ground. the actual soil on which the structures are built or the soil within which the pipeline system is constructed may also fail. San Francisco is an area which is built on reclaimed land. There are many old river channels and bay areas which have been reclaimed with loose sandy fill, which is now saturated. And during an earthquake, that material can liquefy, literally can turn into a viscous or even liquid material, which may flow or spread laterally, causing large ground deformations. And that is one of the most serious threats in San Francisco with respect to the underground piping system. And I'm wondering at this time, with the reports coming in of the broken water mains and the loss in water pressure, if soil liquefaction and large ground deformation isn't playing a role in the performance of that water delivery system.
Just so we understand what liquefaction is, you're telling us that when a quake begins to shake the earth, it's rather like a jello effect on fill area, and the earth begins to behave more like a liquid than a solid that we think we're standing on. Is that correct?
That's correct. What really happens is during the seismic shaking, the water pressures within the soil build up so that there is no longer any contact forces between the individual grains. At this time, then the soil behaves as if it were a fluid or a viscous liquid and can literally move many feet. In 1906, the earthquake which struck San Francisco generated liquefaction ground deformations which were as large as 5 to 7 feet.
And of course, any building that's erected in that sort of an area that isn't properly reinforced is going to be in serious trouble. As we saw in Mexico City when the quake struck there was a very specific area of Mexico City that suffered a lot of damage, and there was something like 10,000 deaths in Mexico City. I think it was back in 1986. But the area that took the most serious hit there was an area that was built on a lake bed that was indeed that fill soil, sedimentary fill, and it amplified the vibrations of the quake, so the buildings there were the ones that were most severely damaged.
That's correct. The deposits in Mexico City were, if you want, tuned into the frequency of the ground waves which reached Mexico City through the bedrock. They amplified those ground waves and caused amplified ground deformations at the surface of the ground in the lake bed deposits, which then were further amplified because the buildings have a specific frequency, many of which were tuned into that specific frequency, and they were damaged substantially.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas O'Rourke. Good advice and good information on that. The mayor of San Jose, California is being interviewed now by KRON. Let's listen in.
San Jose Mayor Tom McHenry, a very, very lucky community here in the South Bay. San Jose, unfortunately, in other areas of the South Bay, things not so lucky. Santa Cruz, several fatalities in a collapse at the Pacific Garden Mall in Santa Cruz. We have crews on the way right there. There have been several several buildings have been structurally damaged, but no collapses, at least as far as San Jose is concerned. We've been traveling around. Power is slowly but surely coming back to the South Bay. The electricity, as I said, is beginning to come back. Traffic has gotten much better now that the traffic lights are operating again. So San Jose, as I said, very, very lucky. The South Bay, very, very lucky. Less than 10 miles from the epicenter and of this earthquake that terribly rattled San Francisco and Oakland, of course. But as I said, the South Bay, very, very lucky at this point. I'm Carl Sonkin reporting live from the San Jose City Emergency Communications Center. Now back to you, Evan and Emerald.
Thank you, Carl. A lot less lucky is over in the East Bay at the Cypress structure that's on the other side of the Bay Bridge. And we're now going to go to Tom DeReese for the latest on that situation. He reports to us from the East Bay Bureau. Tom.
Emerald, the big damage here is the Cypress structure. It's the worst damage I've heard of generally in the Bay Area, but the damage is largely in Oakland and the East Bay confined to that Cypress structure. On the other hand, that's quite bad enough. Oakland officials are confirming 6 bodies, only 6, not the somewhat higher numbers we've heard during the evening. They have taken only 6 bodies out of the Cypress structure. That figure came to me just about 20 minutes ago. There are still people trapped in the Cypress structure. The 2 layers, as you've seen in pictures we took earlier this evening, have pancaked, and there are still cars and they presume still victims trapped between the 2 parts of the freeway, but they don't know whether those people are alive or dead, and they are now mounting a major structure to get the victims out of the freeway. They're using both military and firemen and police officers as well, by the way, from a number of departments where the damage in the East Bay has not been great, have come in here with truckloads of men and buses of firefighters to go help with the rescue efforts on the Cypress structure. Other news in the area in the East Bay, particularly Oakland, seems to be good. They know of no major structure damage to buildings. There have been no earthquake-related fires. but there is still a lot of minor damage, minor compared to what we might have expected given the severity of the shake. Here's a comment we heard from Jerry Freeman, a man who just made a tour that we talked to earlier this evening. Here's his comments.
Yeah. Oh, it's just total devastation. I mean, the destruction all the way around. We were around the lake when it first started. It was at the Grand Lake Theater, and the marble started falling off the walls, and I grabbed my wife. She didn't know what was happening, and we just pulled each other, you know, out in the street, and people were started running out of the buildings, and it was just incredible. And then we was walking back to walking along the Lake Merritt, and you can see the gaps in the lake and everything, gaps on the side of the crevices and everything. Then we went back up and just looked over the city, and it was just incredible. All total darkness. We could see smoke coming from everywhere. Then we found out about the overpass, the Cypress overpass. That's just incredible. So, you know, I know no one will really realize the devastation of it until the sunlight comes up. Yeah.
That's it. When the sunlight comes up, we're going to see how bad it is. Meanwhile, they're working all night long at the Cypress structure to work there. The good news really is that there has been no damage to the East Bay's water supply. Water pressure is good, and the water supply has not been broken. That was a major concern. The Red Cross is opening shelters for people who are trapped in the East Bay because of the bridge collapse. There at the Red Cross on East 14th Street. Emerald, Evan.
Tom, once again, can you give us the latest on the fatalities at Cypress?
The confirmed fatalities, that is, how many bodies who Oakland officials say they actually have removed from the Cypress structure, which you can see has collapsed, trapping a number of cars, are only 6, as in the last 20 minutes. They do expect to find more victims, but they're still trapped between the layers of concrete, which is almost a half a mile long. So that presumably that death toll will rise, but it is not as high as we originally feared.
That 250 number, apparently, we may not get close to. We certainly pray that is true. We should mention that virtually all the bridges in the Bay Area have been inspected. San Mateo Bridge was the last one to reopen, except for the Bay Bridge, of course. It, too, is now open. All the bridges, in fact, are operating in the Bay Area, except the Bay Bridge. And Rita Cohen is in Helicopter 4. And while the bridge she's over is open, apparently there's quite a jam. Rita?
Well, we're trying to help people who were in San Francisco now trying to make their ways back home, be it in Marin County or over to the East Bay if they were stuck in San Francisco. We have checked the Golden Gate Bridge, and traffic there, though it was heavy on the surface streets getting out of San Francisco, was flowing smoothly on the deck of the bridge itself and all the way up to Larkspur, which is where we are right now, and finding a backup from Larkspur to the San Rafael Bridge. But once on the span of the bridge, this traffic is flowing. You can get into the East Bay. Likewise story for the Carquinez Bridge, Highway 80, that is reported open and moving, and Highway 680, the Benicia Bridge, never was affected by the earthquake. That is still open, and traffic is flowing smoothly there. We have unconfirmed reports of a landslide along Highway 17, which is blocking traffic between Santa Cruz and Los Gatos. That is impassable as far as we can understand. And also Highway 280 is closed between Magdalena and Highway 85 in the South Bay. Severe buckling of the road surface, and Caltrans crews trying to muster some crews there now to get that repaired. We were just watching over the Yerba Buena Island as the helicopters, California Highway Patrol helicopter, was flying in engineers. They are already starting to work on the Bay Bridge problem to see what they can do to get that span reopened as quickly as possible. In the meantime, the red and white ferries are offering shuttle service for people who may be stuck in San Francisco and want to get to the East Bay tonight. We tried to get a good overview of that, though, but the power is still out at the ferry building along the Embarcadero, so it was very difficult for us to see from the air, but the red and white ferries are operating. We could see them at the dock. We have no word from BART yet on when they may be restoring service in the Trans-Bay Tube. They have been checking out the structure and seeing how that will go. They do have limited service underway between Oakland in the East Bay. That started up about an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, I believe, but still no word yet on when the Trans-Bay Tube may be working again. So a lot of structural problems along the East Shore Freeway, Highway 80. Although the freeway is open, the right-hand lane is flared off in places where, again, buckling has caused problems caused by the earthquake earlier today. Back to you in the studio.
All right, thank you. That's Rita Cohen from Helicopter 4. And talking about transportation issues, apparently There are all kinds of people at the train station, the Caltrans train station in San Francisco, because the announcement came down that they've inspected the track south to San Jose, and they expect to resume rail service and get people out of San Francisco and get them home south on the peninsula. Unfortunately, the last word is there are all kinds of folks hanging out at the train depot. The rail service has yet to be resumed as far as we know, but it is to resume shortly. That should ease things. Meanwhile, Rita couldn't see, but we're told there are all kinds of folks also at the ferry building trying to get on that red and white fleet and get back to Oakland as best they can.
Also, Highway 101 near Candlestick, that was blocked for a while. We're told that traffic is moving there. And Candlestick, of course, the site of Game 3 of the World Series, which up until 5:04 was probably the biggest thing going on in the Bay Area, and right now is probably one of the least important things going on, especially considering the fatalities. The numbers keep coming in, but this time the numbers are actually going down. Tom DeVries was telling us that from Cypress that half a dozen bodies have been pulled. There are more that they expect to find dead, but they don't think at this point it would be as high as 250. We will continue our coverage of our 7.0 earthquake that struck at 5:04 today. We'll be right back in a moment.
This is Chuck Scarborough, NBC News in New York, and we're continuing our coverage of the earthquake that struck San Francisco today. And for those of you who are just joining us, I'll give you a quick overview of what happened. It was 5:04 in the afternoon. The third game of the World Series was about to get underway when suddenly the San Andreas Fault slipped a bit, and in 15 seconds did extraordinary damage to the San Francisco Bay Area. We've seen quite a bit of that this evening on television coming out of San Francisco from station KRON, which has been doing a terrific job covering this. We're feeding that out to the rest of the network. You can see the epicenter near Santa Cruz, actually about 10 miles north of Santa Cruz. When the quake struck, it was about 6.9 or 7 on the Richter scale, according to seismologists around the country who've measured it. This is a very serious quake. It severely shook the area, did an awful lot of damage. Fires broke out in a limited area in San Francisco, and there are reports of fires in peripheral areas as well. The fires are fueled to some extent by gas lines that ruptured in the area, feeding the fires. And gas is a continuing danger there, because when gas reaches a mixture between 5 and 15% with air, if it's leaking, it then becomes explosive, and any spark of any sort can set it off. So there is continuing concern in San Francisco, even where there are no fires, about continuing leaking natural gas in the area. The death toll has been fluctuating wildly all night. It was as high at one point, reportedly up to 250 or so dead. But now we've seen the officials backing off from that report as they try to get a firmer fix on exactly how many were killed. But the devastation is obviously terrible, particularly on the Oakland side of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. There was a collapse there. If you haven't seen it before, it is an awesome thing to see, because about 1.5 miles of the freeway, a double-deck freeway, simply collapsed. That is, the top portion of the freeway let go and fell on the bottom portion of the freeway at the worst possible time at 5:04 in the afternoon. The town was packed, people rushing home for rush hour. And there you see where the Bay Bridge is. If you look to the right of your screen on Route 880, that's where the main collapse occurred, although the Bay Bridge itself was damaged as well. We're highlighting the area for you now. Any cars, obviously, between the two roadways, the upper and lower, were pancaked completely down and crushed. And they're still trying to tally the death toll there. This is NBC News in New York. We're continuing our coverage of the San Francisco quake today that struck and did considerable damage to the San Francisco Bay Area. Robert Bazell is standing by now. He is our science correspondent. And Robert, can you give us a little more information on the nature of this quake and what's happening?
Well, Chuck, what I know, of course, is what I've been seeing on the news reports and also talking to friends, family, and other associates in the area. I am from San Francisco, so I know a great deal about the area. In some ways, of course, this is the terrible tragedy that we've been talking about, but as it unfolds, it seems like there are some very positive parts of it as well. The positive parts are that a lot of the emergency services remained intact as planned. The fire services seem to function, the police function very well. Everybody took part and joined together in helping each other. There have been some reports of some rioting and looting in the area of the collapsed freeway, the 880 freeway in Oakland. That freeway happens to run through some public housing, which is a very poor area, and there might be some pent-up frustration that got let out because of the tragedy. But all the hospitals are open. Apparently all the people who need medical care are getting it. The ambulances have been moving through the city without much trouble. There's a lot of people, as we heard from the KRON anchors, who are waiting for transportation because they had to abandon their cars and that sort of thing. But in a lot of ways, this seems to be something that, as bad as it was, it could have been a lot worse, because people who talk about earthquakes have always said that the worst possible time for an earthquake to hit would be just like this at rush hour. So it seems to have done much less damage. One of the big concerns was all those new skyscrapers in downtown San Francisco, except for some broken glass that hit the street and injured people in that way. There doesn't seem to have been too many injuries, and the structure certainly remained intact. So I think we can look at some positive parts to this, as well as it being, of course, a terrible tragedy.
I think so, and I think that San Franciscans such as yourself have a particular sensitivity to earthquakes because of the history of the area, especially after the 1906 quake, when there was some debate, as I recall my history, some debate on whether or not San Francisco ought to be rebuilt after that devastation. And the civic pride carried the day back in 1906, and it was decided to go ahead and rebuild the city, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, it was indeed. That's an interesting part, and it seems like there's been an enormous outpouring of civic pride in the area, not just in San Francisco, of course, but in the East Bay and in the South Bay as well today. We're still getting scattered reports of other areas down near the epicenter in Santa Cruz. Apparently there's been some fatalities and that sort of thing. But again, it hasn't been the massive devastation that we might hope. Again, although it is important to point out in terms of thinking about future disasters and future problems in the area that, as the earthquake specialist you interviewed just a while ago said, this earthquake is still less than 10 times as powerful as the 1906 earthquake. So the potential is there for a lot of serious damage both in northern and southern California. However, as the evening unfolds, what I've been hearing is, to me, has been much more hopeful than the original news.
You've answered a question for me. The 06 quake was 10 times as strong as the quake today?
About that. The Richter scale is a logarithmic scale, so that if you go up from 6 to 7, it becomes 10 times as much. So that's a great deal much more powerful. And in fact, this quake is not what seismologists have always been talking about as the big one. The big one is a quake that exceeds 8. The last big one in the continental United States was the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, and then there was the 1964 earthquake that was centered in Valdez, Alaska. That was about the same magnitude, but fortunately at that time there wasn't much population there.
And I've got to tell you, Bob, that the thought of a quake 10 times as powerful as the one that we saw today, the big one, as you say, to me is a little scary, because I think there was considerable damage done by this quake that barely nudged 7 on the Richter scale. If you multiply that by a factor of 10, I would be very concerned about San Francisco's ability to withstand that.
Well, that's right, and the prediction has been that big one, the target of that big one, the next one, is going to be in Southern California. The biggest danger zone seems to be the San Andreas Fault area near San Bernardino. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to happen there, but in terms of statistics, they're talking about that being the area where that kind of slippage of the fault could occur. One of the things that's important is a recent study of fault dangers did point out, however, that there had been a major possibility of this kind of slippage in the South Bay that had been overlooked in emergency planning for a long time. And a few months ago, there was a 5.4 earthquake just about in the same area of the San Andreas Fault as this one hit. And at the time, there was a warning given that people should maybe think that there was going to be a bigger one coming. And then, of course, that was forgotten. And also, that shows how imprecise the seismology is and earthquake prediction is. Nobody really predicted this. No scientist was able to say that this was coming.
No, Bob, they say scientists can't, animals somehow can sense it maybe 24 hours in advance. There's some agitation on the part of animals, and we haven't figured out a way with all of our fancy machinery and our seismographs and everything else to predict when a quake will hit.
Yeah, and the other thing is, in terms of damage, that portion of the 880 freeway that was destroyed with such devastating results is not old construction. That is not 1920s, 1930s freeway. I remember when that was built, and I wouldn't want to be held to an exact date, but I think it was around in the 1960s. I think, as another one of the scientists you had on before pointed out, that is on an area of landfill that can behave just like a bowl of Jell-O during an earthquake.
All right, Bob Bazell, thank you. Your loved ones and relatives are fine in San Francisco? They pulled through okay?
Yes, everyone is fine. Thanks for asking. I appreciate it.
All right, Bob. We're going to go back to KRON in San Francisco as they continue their coverage. They've got some new footage up now showing the bridge that collapsed. And let's take a look at that. This is a fire, actually. This is the fire that was burning in a localized area on the northern part of the town, the Marina District. And this was the fire I was talking earlier about that was fueled by the broken gas main initially. But you can see these are wood frame buildings. And wood frame buildings normally stand up fairly well in an earthquake because they're somewhat flexible. But given enough shaking and given the nature of the soil here, we heard an earlier scientist explain that soil in an earthquake, when it's the kind of sedimentary fill soil that you have in this particular area of San Francisco, it almost becomes sort of liquid like jello, and it amplifies the shaking of the quake. This is KRON correspondents right now, Evan White and Emerald Yee, and they are covering the quake. We'll listen into them.
The Magnan facade, the only major, as far as we know, downtown department store to lose a lot of glass. Macy's and Neiman Marcus did not. These are the folks who suffered the wrath of the glass, cut by the glass as it fell to the sidewalk. This one in the head, this female companion with this young man threw herself, no, this is a young woman.
Thrown herself on her brother, actually.
On her brother to protect him. She lost some fingers and was terribly cut up. It was a scene of a great deal of agony in Union Square this afternoon, and much serious injuries from the glass, which is always the hazard in earthquakes, no matter where it is.
And Belva Davis, who came back from, she was right there when it happened, said that that was the one building where the glass fell from. She said it didn't happen from the other buildings nearby, and there are other big department stores, Macy's and Neiman Marcus, but this is where the glass fell out and struck people below.
I was handed a note I want to make mention. The Salvation Army is appealing for volunteers. This is in San Francisco. Sandwiches, people to bring sandwich material. They want breads and meats and the like in 2 locations in San Francisco. I'm sorry, 1 in San Francisco, 1 in Oakland. If you want to help, at 1275 Harrison Street, south of Market in San Francisco, the Salvation Army could use some help with sandwich makings and to make the sandwiches. In Oakland, the address is 600 Webster. They're going to stay there all night, and they could use some sandwich makings and some folks to put it together.
We're joined once again now by Greg Lyon. And Greg, what have you got?
Well, I was down in the Marina District. You showed pictures just a bit earlier, and I'm just here to kind of talk about how it felt to be down there, and the fact that I think when this thing is revealed in daylight tomorrow, we will find out that the Marina District suffered intense damage. There are buildings that are not collapsed down there that are off their foundations, and many of them. I didn't make a count because of the fire. We were mainly covering the fire. But there are structures that have moved completely off their foundations. You can see rows of garage doors, all of them slightly opened, having been forced open when the building settled, and it kicked the garage doors out. There are entire blocks where it appears that every garage door on the block is kicked out. The Marina District was indeed hard hit. As you said, there were fatalities. There was that terrible fire. There were people in that adjoining buildings who were rescued in heroic efforts by the fire department. Can't say enough good things about them and what they did. They stood there for perhaps 2 hours within 50 feet of a fire that was just raging, cooled the building down, finally got a woman out. And tomorrow morning it's going to show some severe damage.
And the Marina District, of course, is a particularly vulnerable area in our city because of landfill, and earthquake experts have said that that would be a dangerous area.
We've always felt that, right. As we cover stories, covering story after story on every April on the anniversary of the earthquake, that the Marina District would be hard hit, and in fact it was.
All right, Greg, thank you.
Little notice from the National Guard. They want folks to know that the 146 Combat Support Group is going to be active. It's in active duty status at Fort Funston. Anybody in the 146 is asked to report for active duty. Also, out of Travis Air Force Base is going to be a National Guard mobilization point. The National Guard is going to bring in some heavy equipment into the Bay Area to be used anywhere that's needed.
Right now, we go back to Rita Cohen. She's in Helicopter 4 over perhaps one of the most tragic scenes in this earthquake. She's over the Bay Bridge. Rita?
Well, we are looking at what normally would be a lit-up Bay Bridge and a very bright San Francisco. I was just commenting with the crew on board Helicopter 4, cameraman Lou Calderon and our pilot Will Prater. The number of hours we have spent in night flight, flying in the dark, and it just is so hard to look over to San Francisco and not see the lights there from the Oakland skyline. Those who have a view, normally have a view of the skyscrapers and of the lights in San Francisco, you will see many parts of the city that are in darkness. Just an eerie sight. It's also what we're seeing, of course, at the Bay Bridge Toll Plaza and over the Cypress section of the Nimitz Freeway, where just 2 areas where the floodlights and the crews are still working. Otherwise, it is darkness. In fact, so dark that we have a couple of police helicopters that are working the neighborhoods of West Oakland, apparently concerned about looting. and they are down there right now. That is what we're showing you. It's hard to see. As I say, lights are out, power is out in this section of Oakland, as it is in many areas still throughout the East Bay. We can look up along San Pablo Avenue through many parts of Berkeley, Emeryville, still with the power out, darkness in those areas. Downtown Oakland, though, we can mention the Kaiser building. That is entirely lit up. The Tribune sign is lit up on top of their building in downtown Oakland. Wanted to mention Bay TRACON, which is one of the major air traffic control agencies, of course, here in the Bay Area that monitors traffic for us in the sky, has just issued a 3,000-foot overflight restriction over Richmond because of hazardous gas leaks. It may be because of broken gas mains in the city of Richmond. That information just coming in to us from Bay TRACON, that they have imposed that flight restriction for hazardous gas leaks over the Richmond area. We can see Richmond off of our side window and do not see any fires or flames, but apparently some concern, and that advisory has been issued by Bay TRACON. Let me mention quickly, too, the traffic situation. We still have a lot of people trying to drive out of San Francisco and get home, be that Marin County or the East Bay. The Golden Gate Bridge is open. Traffic is flowing across the span in both directions. It was quite heavy getting out of San Francisco, but once you get to the span of the bridge, the traffic is flowing at a pretty good clip. Then you will also find traffic flowing smoothly across the San Rafael Bridge. Most of that traffic headed in an eastward direction. And right over it, I know it's dark, but we're showing you Highway 80, and traffic is making the connection here through Berkeley and Emeryville and into downtown Oakland and onto Highway 580. Looks like the Caldecott Tunnel is open and traffic is moving there. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Rita. Here's some specifics, in fact, on all those black areas down below Telecopter 4. PG&E says at its peak, nearly 1 million homes without power, and some 56,000 homes are still without power in the East Bay, and that power may not be restored until late this afternoon, or late tomorrow afternoon, excuse me. San Francisco, hardest hit with outages, still in trouble, most of the city. Most of San Jose is still out, and they hope to be back with power by noon tomorrow. So it's going to be a long night for a lot of folks in terms of light.
A long, dark night. And now we're joined by Linda Yee. She was at Candlestick when the earthquake hit. In fact, your cameras captured some of the earthquake motion.
We captured some of it. Before we get to that tape, though, I have to tell you, we were on the upper level of Candlestick Park. We were with the fans. We were doing our story when suddenly I felt the entire stadium shift. We thought it was just fans at first being very excited, stomping. Then I looked up and saw the actual concrete separating back and forth from the light post. It was the most frightening experience. You'll see the pictures are a little shaky, but this is just this is videotape of the actual earthquake happening. You can probably hear people in the background starting to scream. I wouldn't say it was chaotic at the time. Most people really didn't know what was happening. They were stunned. And then when they actually realized what was happening, that's when the screaming started. A lot of nervous people. Down on the baseball field, you can see that the players were confused about what was going on. And then when we took a look around the stadium, we noticed that there were cracks all around the stadium. In a few seconds, you'll see some pictures of that. In fact, so much debris was falling. I talked to some people who were carrying chunks of concrete out of the stadium.
The staircase in section 53 broke up into pieces like this, and it's really dangerous up there. But the whole thing broke into pieces, so I got my souvenir.
Just missed. Yeah, just missed. It really came down. Yeah, we're on the top deck. It really shook. I've lived here all my life, and it never scared me in an earthquake. That was the first one that scared me.
Despite what was happening, it was really an orderly exit. I mean, some 62,000 people actually calmly walked out of the stadium. There didn't seem to be any panic. We're told that there were 2 injuries. 2 heart attack victims were taken from the Candlestick Park, and a woman who had been hit by falling debris was treated and released at Candlestick Park. As far as the game is concerned, obviously that's not a big priority now, but the baseball commissioners will be meeting tomorrow. They're going to be checking the structural damage of Candlestick Park. They're also going to look at the Coliseum, but it's it's unlikely that the game is going to continue, the World Series, as far as we know now.
All right, Linda, thanks a lot. And the way the crowd had left that stadium, I think, is one of the salient points of this earthquake tonight. The Bay Area people all over not creating pandemonium and scattering in a panic. Thanks a lot. That video really showed it.
Senator Pete Wilson has joined us in our studios this evening. You were in San Francisco when it hit. Where were you?
I was on the 13th floor of the Clift Hotel.
13th floor.
It's not a very lucky place to be.
It was, no, you're right, although luckier than for the
We understand Washington is responding already, and they have one of the secretaries coming out. Can you tell us anything?
Yes, I can. In fact, when I leave here, I'm going to go back to the hotel and hopefully get up to the 13th floor, change clothes, and then go down to try to meet Secretary Skinner.
Is he coming in tonight?
He's coming in tonight. And the Vice President, I think, is trying to make his way back up, too. He was here this morning for breakfast and is coming back. There will probably be traveling with Secretary Skinner, as I'm informed, Congressman Mineta and Congressman Edwards, and also Mrs. Quayle.
There is so much to be done, and as soon as possible, of course. How difficult is it to get the wheels going, to get the kind of federal help in here that's going to be needed?
I think that there will be all kinds of help made available. There is great difficulty, obviously, until daylight, with an assessment of just how much damage has actually occurred to the infrastructure. The obvious you know about the...
Sure. Have you been able to get any kind of information that might supplant what we already know?
Oh, I doubt it. I think you probably know more than I do. You've been looking at the pictures all night. This is the first time I've had a chance to see any because, of course, there's no power outside of your shop here where you have your own generator. And so I've been on the phone to the White House. I've been on the phone to the governor's office. I'm hearing from people in Washington and Sacramento and in New York about what they have been able to see, but I haven't been able to see it because there are no lights, there are no phones. I had one phone, I stayed where there was a phone working, and I was able to make calls out, not get them back in, but that's how I've been able to find out what is happening, but I haven't seen anything.
Well, I know you're going to have a very busy schedule when Secretary Skinner gets here. I'd like to ask you if you find the time and you can stop by so the Secretary could perhaps talk to us about what we can expect and look forward to, because a lot of people would like to know.
I have the feeling that he probably will not, he'll probably be available for people who are out where he is. He's going to come in the middle of the night, get a briefing.
Now, where will he land? San Francisco airport's closed down.
Yeah, San Francisco is closed down. I expect he'll be coming into Moffett.
All right, sir. Senator Pete Wilson, thanks very much for coming by. We appreciate it all.
Also coming into Northern California, returning to Sacramento, will be Governor Deukmejian. He is not only out of state, but he is also out of the country. He was in Frankfurt, West Germany when this earthquake happened. He is about to get on an airplane. He is, we're told, leaving at midnight our time, so it's about a 12-hour trip, and he should be here tomorrow. And in the meantime, the acting governor of California is Lieutenant Governor Leo McCarthy, and he was at Candlestick when the earthquake happened, and that's where he started presiding as acting governor.
A couple of reminders, if you haven't heard, we're being asked to conserve water in San Jose and in San Francisco because of water main problems, but in Mountain View, where a main water supply is burst, it's critical to save water. And
well, we have temporarily lost the signal from KRON in San Francisco. They've been doing a terrific job out there covering this earthquake under very difficult conditions as they had to operate on auxiliary power. They were just talking with Senator Pete Wilson, whom we talked with on the telephone some time ago. He was in a hotel in San Francisco when the quake struck, and he described quite a bit of shaking in his hotel room. We have Dan Donahue, who is the Chief of Public Affairs for the National Guard. He's at the Pentagon right now, and there were some reports Bob Bazell mentioned, and they are on the wires, that despite all of the heroics we've seen, and certainly the overwhelming story out of San Francisco besides the disaster right now, is the heroic rescue going on to save people. Certainly a lot of men and women risking their lives because there are aftershocks, and going into areas where there's considerable damage, risking another aftershock, knocking some more stuff down to save lives for people who are in there. Nonetheless, there have been reports of some looting, some gangs roaming the streets with baseball bats, and you saw a few moments ago a helicopter circling around trying to cast light on the neighborhoods that are completely blacked out. There's a power loss, about 1 million people without power right now in San Francisco, which is one of the consequences of an earthquake. Anyway, Dan Donahue is on the phone with us from the Pentagon, and he is the Chief of Public Affairs for the National Guard. And can you give us any more information, Mr. Donahue, on the nature of the situation with the looting in San Francisco and what else you might be doing to help the situation out there?
Yeah, I can talk to both, at least specifically on what the Guard is doing. In terms of the looting and so forth, we've heard the same reports you have, but we have got no National Guardsmen involved in either policing, looting, or do anything in terms of riot control. We do have some select Guardsmen, MP types, military police, who are out assisting with traffic control. We've got about 1,500 Army and Air National Guardsmen, all from California, providing air rescue and recovery helicopters, which are typical Air Force type rescue and recovery unit. We've got C-130 cargo airlift airplanes that are already moving into the San Francisco area. In fact, one of them has already moved to Los Alamitos and is bringing up an evacuation hospital to be stationed up at Travis. And then we've got a number of engineer units that are going to come into the area that are heavy engineers. And then we've got 2 helicopter units that are moving in. One of them is the 126th Air Ambulance Unit out of the Army Guard in California from Sacramento, coming in with 26 medical evacuation helicopters. And G Company of the 140th Aviation out of Stockton that's coming in with 10 CH-47 utility helicopters that are capable of hauling supplies within the city and so forth.
So obviously your primary concern now is to try to help in the rescue effort, trying to get the injured out and get medical treatment for them.
That's correct. The governor's office in California has ordered the Guard to state active duty, and the Guard will do as the civilian authorities request.
Now, in other areas with the Guard, do you anticipate problems, say, with the drinking water, with some water damage, having to get water into people who may not have it, or are you going to help try to restore electricity, that sort of thing?
Well, at this point, the governor's office has asked for the basic life support that we're giving it. At this point, clearly the National Guard has the capability, if the governor's office so decides, to provide water purification. Clearly we have the ground transportation equipment that could move that kind of water and do basically any of the life support functions and sustenance functions that we need within the state, and that's the governor's call completely.
I know this is a bit out of your purview, but there were reports out of San Francisco that the bridge, the Oakland Bay Bridge that has partially collapsed because of the quake, can be restored in a matter of days by the Army Corps of Engineers, perhaps. Can you explain how that might be done, how the Army could get that bridge back and patched up and able to transport traffic back and forth?
Well, with the disclaimer that I'm not an engineer and I'm not technically qualified, I can tell you the Army engineers have a number of different bridging capabilities that you use in combat that are designed to be put in place very quickly and very effectively and can carry a heavy load. I don't know what the structural damage to the bridge is, and frankly, I'm not qualified to judge it if I did know what it was, but they do have a bridging capability within the American Army that's quite substantial. It can be put in place very, very fast, and it's very, very effective.
All right, from your point of view, Mr. Donahue, how important is it to get that transportation working again on the bridges and the roadways that have collapsed?
I would presume, as in any other city in this country, a major artery in terms of transportation is absolutely essential to cleaning up the ground lines of communication, moving people back and forth, obviously supplies, and rebuilding the area.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have Bob Bazell now back with us. Bob, I was looking at the Armenian earthquake, and the Armenian quake, you'll recall, struck in December of 1988. Mr. Gorbachev was in this country, had to fly back quickly because of the disaster. That quake was only a 6.9 on the Richter scale, which was just right in the same area as this quake in San Francisco, 6.97 in San Francisco. 25,000 people died in Armenia, but that was largely because of the construction in Armenia. Most of the buildings in Armenia were unreinforced concrete. Am I not correct?
That's true. As one earthquake specialist told me right after the Armenian earthquake, earthquakes don't kill people, buildings kill people, and I think we're seeing that in San Francisco as well, or at least structures kill people. It's the structures that fail, like that bridge complex coming out of the Bay Bridge, or the other houses that fail occasionally of fire. San Francisco, the wooden structures in San Francisco in the 1906 earthquake survived very well, and I think we saw that today as well. That fire in the Marina District was a fire, as you pointed out, caused by a gas main. But the old San Francisco wooden houses, a lot of them have been around since before the 1906 earthquake, and they do very well. They kind of shake and go with the shaking and the movement of the earthquake. The big question, of course, is the newer buildings, which are unlike Armenia. They are reinforced with a lot of steel beneath the concrete, and so they withstood very well. So building codes, of course, I think will be re-examined again very closely in the wake of this disaster, but I think on the whole, a lot of people are going to say that California has done very well with its building codes, even though there have been a lot of deaths from this earthquake.
Well, I think California has. They've paid an awful lot of attention to the building codes, and certainly new architecture is very well stressed in California. I know in Los Angeles they've had a program of just getting rid of, either reinforcing or getting rid of all the old buildings of 4 dwelling units or more for a number of years now, and I think the deadline is 1992 in Los Angeles to have every building in the city of more than 4 dwelling units essentially earthquake proof, as much as you can do that. But in California, the buildings are probably 4 or 5 times stronger than they are on the East Coast, because we don't regard earthquakes as a real possibility here, and California's had a lot of experience with them.
Well, that's true, although a lot of people do point out that there's a possibility of earthquakes in many places in the East Coast, and one of the worst earthquakes that ever struck the United States struck in Missouri. So I think that, you know, no place is safe from this, but California earthquakes are a fairly frequent occurrence. And it is interesting to point out that the San Francisco earthquake of today and the Armenian earthquake were almost exactly the same density. Another thing that's interesting when you look at it is the damage does not appear to be close to the epicenter. The damage, the biggest damage seems to be from that bridge collapse in Oakland and in other places in San Francisco. And what happens is that energy radiates up through the soil, and oftentimes in funny ways. The Mexico City earthquake that killed so many people, the epicenter was 300 miles away. So living near a fault or on a fault or that sort of thing is often not exactly the clearest indication of whether you're going to be in trouble if the earthquake does strike.
Bob Bazell, if you'll stand by for just a minute here, we've just made contact with Colonel Bruce Harvey of the Salvation Army in San Francisco, and obviously, Colonel Harvey, you're going to have your hands full.